Senator Felag.
Present.
Senator Paolino.
Here.
Senator Acosta.
Present.
Senator Cano.
Here.
Senator Chacon.
Present.
Senator Murray.
Present.
Senator Sebeny.
Here.
Senator Sosnowski.
Here.
9 members. There is a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk, and thank you, everyone, for being here today. We would like to start off today hearing House Bill 6122, aka the budget, and specifically the elementary and secondary education fiscal 21 supplemental and fiscal 22 budgets. We'll also be talking a bit about the March student data update that typically informs the funding formula. We do have several individuals here on behalf of the administration, both the commissioner and a series of individuals with the Department of Education. But Joe, I will turn over to you to make any introductory remarks before passing over to the commissioner.
Thank you very much, Chairman, members of the committee. It's my pleasure to be here with you tonight on aspects of the governor's budget related to K through 12 education. I am glad to step in later with responses to any questions, but I also want to introduce my colleagues from the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education with you tonight, including Commissioner Infante Green, Ann O'Reilly, Deputy Commissioner, Kelvin Rodan, Deputy Commissioner, Victor Capellan, Senior Advisor, Sandra Lopes, Chief of Fiscal Operations, and Mark Dunham, Director of Finance, who are prepared to give a brief presentation to you on their department budget, as well as cover the March student data update. With that, Chairman, if you please, I'd like to pass it off to Commissioner Infante Green.
Thanks so much,
Hi,
Joe.
can you hear me?
We can, Commissioner, and welcome to...
You can hear me?
We can. Welcome to Senate Finance.
Okay, good, because I can't hear you. All right.
We can hear you.
Thank you, everyone. I'm excited to be here and share everything that RIDE has been able to do. To the esteemed members of the Senate Committee on Finance, thank you, Committee Chairman Pearson and Subcommittee Chair Murray, for inviting me here today. And you are going to be in for a treat, I promise. So we're going to start off with our strategic plan work. Despite the challenges presented by COVID-19, we haven't paused any of the work that we've done. I know that you may be wondering, how is that possible? But we really haven't. That included updating our strategic plan for the next 5 years, which has been our guide as we quickly stand up our new priorities and initiatives in response to the new challenges and priorities. It also meant refocusing our vision as we work to becoming an agency of support, not just one of compliance for our local agencies. So I'm not going to read to you our vision and our mission because you have it in front of you. But what was really important for us was really to stay the course. You heard last year about our 3 pillars. We expanded our strategic priorities to better reflect our goals of ensuring high quality education for every student, every district, no matter what. These priorities guided us through this plan and development in our implementation of the work in the field. So this is what we've used to guide us, to really move us forward. And we're really excited about the work that we're currently doing and that we plan to do in the next coming year. One of the things that we wanted to do, if you see our legislative priorities, we wanted to touch upon what we've done. In addition to our work with the strategic plan, we continue to enact and implement guidance we received from you all from 2019 legislation. We created a menu of high quality ELA and math curriculum. I may add 6 months ahead of the schedule, and helped LEAs select and implement curriculum. Created a pathway for experienced teacher leaders in districts to become building level administrators. Implemented the School-Based Management Act, including district report cards for fall 2021. Supporting LEAs in creating 3-year strategic plans and providing training for hundreds of teachers and administrators on the science of reading and specialized professional development around teaching students with dyslexia as required by the Right to Read Act. So as you can see, we've been busy. We've been moving along, and really this has been a tough year, but I think that with the support and the focus that we've had, we've been able to keep the agenda moving. So now, as you see in slide, as we start our agenda, our budget overview, as you will see in the materials, we have not made any major changes to the budget. We're prepared to provide equitable, even funding across the state to the districts who need it. We're also seeking to create 3 new positions, just 3 this year, so we can continue to meet the priorities outlined in the 2019 legislation, including an educational specialist to help us expand our high-quality curriculum drive to social studies and civics. So we're redoing our social studies standards, and we need really to drive that. And within our social studies standards is civics, and we know how important that is as we roll out our new standards. A transformation specialist to ensure our multilingual learners and our differently able students are supported while still promoting school-based management practices. So as you see, we've kept our focus. These are the things that are really important to us. And especially during the pandemic, we've wanted to keep as much normalcy, but also keep moving forward with our educational agenda. So I'll give you a quick Providence update. I'm excited that we were able to visit a school yesterday. So 2020 was the state's full year in control of Providence public school systems. Of course, you know, the pandemic happened right in the midst of that. We took over at the end of November, and a few weeks later, Harrison started and COVID hit. So we've continued to move forward for our students. We established a full turnaround action plan in June. The goals outlined in the TAP were designed by the community with RIDE and PPS staff supporting their vision. But this was really community-led. We made that commitment, and we wanted to honor that. In spite of the pandemic, we pivoted to virtual community engaged to ensure that the voices of Providence parents were heard, and they led our turnaround efforts. Many of the actions we took this first year in the turnaround are foundational steps for improving the school's outcomes. And I think the part that's really important is that we have one person assigned to our TAP plan so that we meet those benchmarks. We have very public benchmarks, and we work towards meeting each and every one of them. We selected a better curriculum for the entire district, and we did it for K-8. Most districts will do K-1, 2 every year, so the kids that are in 5th grade don't reap the benefits. But we thought one curriculum for the entire district makes sense since the community is highly mobile. And the beginning of our capital plan to make improvements in our building is underway. So we're really excited about the progress that we've made in Providence. We've created 30 new positions that are community member positions. We've put guidance counselors in elementary schools where it did not exist, especially in this coming year that we know that there has been a large need for social emotional support for our students. So I'll go through some of our COVID response impact in Rhode Island. It's important that we put the accomplishments in context as we reopen schools. The moment we made the decision in March, if you can recall, it was clear to us that the pandemic was going to deeply disrupt instruction for our kids. So we began to work immediately, and we implemented over the summer before the summer, our assessment program for our students. And we put out an RFP so that we knew that the RICAS was not going to be available. So we wanted to know where our kids were. Everybody in the United States talks about learning loss, but we actually know what our data shows us. We used our localized data to be able to make decisions as we move forward. But in the summer, it was the first time that RIDE ever actually implemented a summer program. And we did it statewide. We had kids from Barrington, we had kids from Central Falls, kids from Providence, all in a class, and we saw about 50-point gains on the SAT in math for kids that were on grade level, and about 100 points for kids that were not on grade level. So we feel really good about being able to do that, and I can tell you that no other SEA in the nation was able to do that. So I feel very proud of the work that we've done. So, as you know, we created our distance learning plans. We had about 3,000 educators that were part of our PD. We had statewide PD. The attendance rates in the summer program were about at 90%. We got national recognition for the efforts and our ability to quickly reopen our schools. There's still states, I want everyone to understand this, there's still states that have not come back in person till this day. So we can only imagine what the effects and the impacts are for our students. Well, with collaboration with our LEA, we led the way for our students, dictating what not dictating what the standards were, but really working with the LEAs to make sure that we were really innovating and provided them with resources. As you know, we created the EDOC to provide resources for our districts, and we have continued to do that, and we've kept our commitment into supporting the districts as we move forward. One of the other things that was really important is that we shifted. And if you see our Learning, Equity, and Accelerated Pathways Task Force, I mentioned the assessments that we had in October and January, so that we can see where our kids, how they were performing. And what the data showed us was really important. We were always thinking that the kids that were most impacted were high school kids. We really saw that it was in the lower grades, and particularly in math, so that we can really align what we need to do to the needs of the kids. So there have been some setbacks, but we know that some of our kids were 2 and 3 years behind before the pandemic. So we wanted to make sure that we don't return to where we were pre-pandemic, that we use this opportunity to accelerate and make sure that our kids get a strong foundation, but that we don't remediate, but give them multiple opportunities for advanced coursework. We saw that in the summer, that we put the kids in a supportive but in a rigorous environment, and they rose to the challenge. So one of the things that was also very interesting as we did this work, the enrollment in the schools has significantly dropped in pre-K kindergarten students, and elementary school students specifically lagged behind in our data. Our data also shows that typically students that were marginalized by our system, Black, Latino students, differently able students, students living in poverty, are drastically more absent in years than in the past years. Obviously, these are communities that were impacted by COVID, so we have a laser sharp focus on these populations. When we saw the assessment results, we knew that we needed to do something about it. Before there was money and everyone kept saying there's going to be, we weren't sure. We put in a committee, a task force, that would look at what are the things that we needed to, not to come out of or survive what COVID has done, but really how do we innovate and really propel ourselves forward. So we convened a task force of education experts, community leaders, local educators, school administrators, and some of our elected officials, like Senator Cano, served on the task force with us, in fact. So we're really excited. And what we really wanted to do is have the community at the table. And we made sure that that was part of the conversation. So last month, we released our final recommendations of our LEAP task force. To truly accelerate their learning, we know that we need a holistic approach. So we brought experts in, and we made sure that the task force reflected Rhode Island's diversity. So our path forward was guided by people who have the lived experiences of our students. And that was really important for us across the board. So, it was really amazing to be part of that discussion. We talked about the gaps for our students, how we can bridge them, what specific actions we need to take. And we've had the opportunity to look at the last 12 months of data in painstaking detail from a wide number of perspectives and learn what we did well and where we can improve. So what we don't want to do is do the same thing we did last year or the year before, have summer programs that didn't yield results, but really look at what does research tell us and how do we have these programs, and whether we're going to extend the day, whatever is going to happen at the district, that it really is led by research and by outcomes. So there's a great deal of work, as you know, in front of us. And we really want to make this student-centric approach as we continue to lead the nation as we recover from COVID-19. On Friday, actually, we're going to be presenting nationwide our LEAP work, because we've gotten a lot of accolades. This work was grounded on 5 priorities for us, and it's energizing our school communities, students and educators, by launching a back-to-school campaign statewide toolkit. What that means is that it's really important. We can't mandate kids to go to summer school, and we've also heard that there's a lot of fatigue and exhaustion. But last year, when we ran our summer school program, we made it very clear that we were going to have the broccoli and the ice cream. So if the kids wanted to take coding, they had to take Algebra 1. And we sort of tried to provide options for our students. The second recommendation is ensuring all students have access to high quality personalized support from adults, both during the school day and after extended learning partnerships and summer learning. And one of the things that we heard was the partnership with CBOs has to change. We have to share data because sometimes they spend a long period of time getting to know the kids. And if we share data from the school, from the schools and go back and forth, that was really important for us. Universal screening of all students and align resources to the needs. So what we don't want is LEAs or a school to say, oh, we're just having a reading program, but not aligned to the needs of the kids. So if what we see that the kids need more math, that's what we're going to give them, and we're going to give it to them aligned to their individual needs. Improving the support students' transitions across grades and systems, and closing the digital divide. We were one of the few states that were able to get technology into the hands of every single kid, as well as Wi-Fi. However, technology needs to be updated. They become obsolete very quickly, and the Wi-Fi isn't the best everywhere. So we really need to invest and close that gap for our students. Thank you for your time this evening. I can go on forever, but I will limit myself so that we have an opportunity to ask questions. And thank you for your support and the work. And we're going to continue to lead nationwide. I said that last year, and we've been leading during a pandemic, and we're going to continue to lead. Thank you very much for all your support, and I'm here to answer any of your questions.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. We appreciate you taking the time to walk us through that. There's a bit of an echo. I'm not sure where it's coming from. All right, it's gone. I want to start off, Senator Cano.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman and Commissioner. I want to make sure you can hear me. She's not having audio. So I'm not sure if we could continue asking some questions to the Commissioner. Commissioner, can you hear me now?
Yes, I jumped onto Anna's computer. I'm here, sorry.
Perfect. I just want to say thank you to you and your staff for the presentation tonight and for hosting us yesterday in the Providence School. We really appreciate it. So I want to ask you a question, actually make a comment, and then I have a question about when you talk about making sure that one of the strategic priorities for RIE is that in every decision making that you make, equity is at the center of that. And I really value that comment, and coming from the chair of education, I really appreciate that, because I think that that is the same approach that we want to take here at the Senate. I want to make sure that I speak to you directly about one of the highlights for the budget, which was to make sure that we fully fund the funding formula calculation. So as we want to continue doing that, I wanted just to make sure that we also recognize that the Senate Education Committee along with leadership of Senator Pearson, 2 years ago, I started the task force on the funding formula, and we do have a series of policies that are going to be taking place, or we are actually working towards prioritizing those policies to make sure that that funding formula calculation is actually, to your point, equitable. There is obviously a lot of things that we recognize that doesn't really align the resources that we provide our cities and towns with the high needs of our students per se. So we're working very diligently to make sure that we do the implementation of these recommendations by the task force, and we just want to make sure that I just wanted to ask you if you do feel that some of those recommendations would actually be more equitable when it comes to you highlight for the budget as being fully funding the funding formula calculation. So I just want to hear your perspective on that, and I have another question after that.
Okay, so just so that I'm making sure that I'm answering the question, if we fully fund, do I feel like it'll be equitable? Yes. I'm hoping that fully funding the formula at this point would allow us to really look at the needs of the kids and keep moving forward as we intend to do. I hope that answers your question.
And Commissioner, do you think that do we need to tweak some of the things that are currently in the funding formula, as of you aware of the recommendations of the task force on the funding formula? So maybe I should ask that way. Do you think that we certainly should tweak some of those calculations that doesn't really help some of our, communities of more need? Well, it doesn't really take in consideration, the ELLs and maybe the LEEs. So I just want to make sure that we make that distinction and that we actually, really put in the front form of this conversation that we still have a lot of work to do, and we are working diligently to make sure that that funding formula calculation is really aligned with the needs of our students.
So I do agree. I think that there needs to be an alignment, because as you participated in our LEAP and we looked at the data, and our kids, there's a subset of kids that have been drastically impacted by COVID, but we're already struggling prior to COVID. Our multilingual learners, our differently able students, our kids in poverty, we know that. And we have this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to really meet the kids where they are. So could we align to those needs? That would be my hope and my desire.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Really appreciate it. And just like you mentioned, I was really proud to participate, and thank you for the invitation to be part of the LEAP Task Force work. I really, truly enjoyed your approach, and you're convening a diverse group of individuals that really, really understand the needs of, the students and the diversity of our students. So I really appreciate that. With that, I'd like to ask the question that I think that I asked previously, in regards to like the recommendations which I was part of. I think are great. I think that we have a very aggressive timeline in terms of recognizing that there is a lot of loss of learning that we really need to tackle together. So those recommendations are really, really important for that. But because you want to have those resources and outcomes, I have two things that I like clarification on. So the first thing is I'm a little bit worried about not having a fiscal plan that is clear when it comes to the implementation of the recommendations of the LEAP work, just to make sure that we do have sustainability and to make sure that there is built capacity after this summer, right? Or maybe after we are scared of the resources, maybe from the federal government, maybe from the municipalities, maybe from RIDE. Where is the allocation of resources coming from? And I understand that there is a lot of different sources, but I really like to have some guidance on that if you have. And and it's good to, if you don't have it, maybe it's good for you to explain to members of the committee how many sources of funding resources are going to support the LEAP recommendations.
Sure. So the majority of the resources are going to come from the federal government. So there have been pockets of money that has been given to all states to really recuperate from the impact of COVID. So most of the money that's coming in, and Mark can give us specific numbers, Mark who's on our team, it goes to the districts. So in the districts, what we have created is a template of a framework that they need to fill out that will meet the LEAP recommendations, so that they're aligned to the recommendations, so that these kids that need it the most are front and center, and also with outcomes. So the federal government has been very clear with all of us that there needs to be targets and outcomes with this money. Mark, do you want to give some particulars about the money?
Sure. Can you hear me? It's on the good side, yes. Good afternoon. So, as the commissioner mentioned, all the states have received highly publicized CARES Act funds. For Rhode Island, it's about $550 million we'll be distributing over the ESSER 2 and the ESSER 3. We are rolling out the ESSER 2 package to all the LEAs this week. And we have created a fund for each of the LEAP initiatives so that we can track how the money is spent, so we can report back to everyone how the money is spent. In fact, we've created cost centers even here at RIDE so that we can attach to all these priorities, so that as RIDE spends its money throughout the state, you can also see, we could also report how the funds are spent. So we think as we walk through the process, we'll have a very good accountability for where these funds are going and how they align with the LEAP priorities and the difference that they make. So we're prepared to distribute the funds and track the funds and report accordingly.
So thank you, Mark. So just so I can capture what you said, out of the $550,000 that are coming to the state, we are giving them money and distributing to municipalities or to districts directly so they can implement the recommendations of the LEAP task force. Is that correct?
Yes, $550 million. And
sorry, million, that's what I meant.
We are giving them guidance and recommendations and suggestions and nudging them in that direction. There is one other code called Other in case that some of the money isn't spent on the LEAP priorities or initiatives, because that's bound to happen. But yes, we are expecting that they will implement these funds, these $500 million of funds, in a manner consistent with the LEAP recommendations throughout the state for the next couple of years.
Okay, that's great. And just like the commissioner said, which is very important, I think that these monies have to be tied to outcomes based on the federal government guidance. So that is very important. So when it comes to sustainability, I want to make sure that I could say again, like after the funding is scarce in 3 years. How are we going to make sure that we build capacity to make sure that the programs implemented and created are sustainable beyond, like, these funds that we do have coming from the federal government, which is a great opportunity. And I would always, encourage our state and, our federal government to give us investment in education, because it's certainly an investment. But how are we going to make sure that we have sustainability beyond this year and up to 2024 and beyond those years, Commissioner?
Well, that's a good question, because what we have done is repurposed our staff to assign them to work with districts and to work through communities so that we can answer that question. Because what we don't want to have happen is just hiring staff and then 3 years down the line, that was your whole strategy. We're not saying that, because then we can't sustain that. You could hire them for the first year, but then what's the plan for the second year? And how do we build capacity? Is there capacity building to your plan so that we have a strong system when the money is gone, that we have built a strong system? One of the things that we are encouraging districts is to really strengthen what's happening in the classroom. Everybody's talking about summer school and extended day, but if they don't strengthen what's happening in the classroom, or we don't strengthen what's happening in the classroom, meaning curriculum, all the things that are important, then we're not going to really see the outcomes that we want. So we are going to be helping districts have those conversations. We're also going to be reviewing the plans, giving feedback to make sure that that is clear how there's going to be sustainability and how we're going to build kind of the training model around this. And these plans are going to be public. So that's important so that everyone can see what the expectations are.
That is great. Thank you so much, Commissioner. Really appreciate it. At the end of the day, it's all about the students, and that is the reason why sustainability and building capacity is so important. So I really, really appreciate you really working with us and just let us know how we can be helpful throughout the process. Thank you so much for your presentation today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thank you for participating, because it was a lot of time that we didn't pay anyone, but we appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Commissioner, and thank you, Chairwoman Cano. I just want to say, a public thank you to Chairwoman Cano and the Education Committee. She has been a great partner to me and to all of us who worked on the funding formula task force. And it's funny, we started in 2019, and we finished the work in 2020. And Commissioner, I think it was some of the first in-person conversations we had when those things were allowed. And, I think about it now, and the members of just this committee who are on the funding formula task force were Senator Palma, Senator Seveny, Senator Cano, Senator Murray, Senator Paolino, and myself. And two of them, one's now the chair of the Education Committee, and I'm here. So I think, if anything, it'll underline the importance that the Senate is taking to those recommendations, and we look forward to continuing to work with you on them. I do know Senator Murray has a question.
Thank you.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner, and the staff for being here to give this presentation. We've talked a lot about K through 12 education, but my question revolves around the adult education division and staffing for that adult education. I believe that up until 2019, there were 3 FTEs, and at present, there is 1 FTE equivalent and plans to hire another half. Is that correct?
For adult education?
Yes, the adult education division that's overseen by RIDE.
Yeah. So I think at this point, we only have 2 positions. Mark, can you correct me?
I'm looking over here too, but yes, we had 3, and we're in the process of filling 1, I believe. So that would give us 2, and there is 1 that we weren't planning on filling the rest of this year.
That you were or were not?
We're not, no.
We're not. So there were previously 3, and you're saying that there are 2 with no plans to fill that 3rd position. Is that correct?
At least not for the rest of this fiscal year.
Okay. Well, I have concerns around that, obviously, because the foundational skills are very important to help adults succeed in the workplace and in life and enable them to connect to better jobs. So I just really want to make sure that you are able to, to provide the adequate staff to support these very, key vital programs, so that every Rhode Islander that needs those programs is able to access these foundational skills. So that does give me some concern that that you are cutting that support staff.
I don't think it's that we're cutting it. It's we have to, the person that was there retired. We are looking for the other position to be filled, but right now we're at the end of the school year. So it doesn't really make sense for us to fill it right now, but we will fill it once the new school year starts.
That's great to hear. I hope that we accomplish that. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I follow up with a question from Senator Murray's line of thinking?
Sure. Senator Seveny.
Thanks. So 2 years ago, Senator Harold Metz was running an adult ed commission to take a look at this whole question. And, there were several concerns that were brought up from that. I'm sure the data from that commission is around somewhere, but even then, it was clear that RIDE was understaffed to actually oversee adult education in the state. It seemed to me, my impression was we had a dozen or maybe even 24 third-party contractors out there running adult education programs, all under the auspices of RIDE, but nobody could even come up with a coherent who's on the waiting list, how many people are trying to get into a seat in adult education somewhere. And there was, I think, some coordination across these third-party providers, but certainly you guys at RIDE had no idea. And I'm wondering if are you working on that? Is that circumstance getting any better? I mean, do you know what the waiting list is?
So I think we work with DLT and OPC on this, so I can circle back with them and get you a better response. I really do not have the answer to that.
Yeah, it would. I would appreciate that, because we really didn't get after we wrapped up the commission. You know, the questions that came out, I never heard again from anybody. So it would be good if we, if you guys are doing something with adult education, I think that would be great. But if you've lost people, if the guy that was running it retired, what are we to make of that?
Yeah, so I will get an answer. So I apologize that nobody has gotten back to you from any of the organizations, but I will get an answer. I think our challenge has been that it's been during COVID. So it has been really hard to fill a lot of these positions, but I will get you an answer.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Costa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Commissioner, for your presentation today. I have 3 questions. The first, I think, is probably that you might be the best person for it. The other 2, I think the director might be able to help us on long-term vision. But the first is about curriculum and uniformity. You mentioned the Providence state takeover and this issue where in one district there wasn't a uniform curriculum. And you alluded to the transient population within that district. But the reality is, within our state, we have pretty transient populations and people moving from city to city. As a former teacher, I can tell you how frustrating it is to try to teach someone who just came over from a different place and is learning something in a different sequence or something from a different curriculum. So does our state currently have a plan to take the uniform curriculum implemented in Providence and scale something up to the state level? And Mark earlier alluded to this idea of nudging. I understand that SEAs are limited in their ability to mandate some things. I know that now we are requiring that school districts, LEAs, get approval from RIDE on adopting curriculum that meets certain standards. But why, is there any compelling reason why you should be able to learn or be learning different things in Coventry compared to Central Falls, compared to Middletown? And is there any plan to bring some more uniformity to that in our state?
So, unfortunately, I don't have the authority to do that. I can nudge, I can put it out there. And what we've done is that we have 5 high-quality curriculums that districts can pick from that are aligned to the standards. So what we did is put that together, went through the process, made sure that they were high quality. But that's as far as my authority goes. I could do that in Providence because I'm overseeing Providence. But other than that, I cannot. But what we are ensuring is that at least the curriculum that they do select is high quality. And to answer your question, is there a reason not to have a statewide curriculum and learning different things? Probably not. But I've learned in my time here in Rhode Island that everybody likes to be different. So I'm very careful with that. But your question is a good question, and it is challenging, especially from districts that we do know that there is that movement. We do know that happens. So, yeah.
Thank you. Follow to my second question here. In 2013, our core per pupil was about tied for first in our neighboring states. And in this next year, we'll be in the bottom. We're 4th place, dead last, compared to our neighbors. I wondered if maybe Mark has the answer for this, or the director does. It states that our core per pupil is supposed to be the average of, at least the average of our neighboring states. But it looks to be, from the information that we've seen, that we're actually below the average. So I wonder if there's any long-term plan to address this. And I want to be completely blunt here and saying I believe that targeted universalism is much more successful than talking about the most under-resourced people. Because the reality here in our state is that even the on-average affluent white student is being shortchanged compared to their neighboring states. And I guess I want to know why and if we have a plan to address that in the short or long term.
Mark, can you answer that?
I guess share a little information. I don't know if I can answer it though, but we do take an average of our neighboring states and we create a core, and put that to a funding formula. It only accounts for a portion of the total educational expense. The rest of it is paid for by each local municipality. So, we take the academics, and the social stuff and the teachers, and there's a list of things we take. Off the top of my head, it escapes me. But then there's a whole other piece of the academic experience that the student goes through that's totally paid for by municipalities. And I don't know how they compare to our neighbors, but I would think it's less coming from municipalities on average, because the rest of it should be pretty much even, because that is taking the average. So in some areas, municipalities probably aren't stepping up to the plate and giving their share. I'm saying that based on, conjecture and kind of hearing this. I don't have the math in front of me to prove that, but it seems that we're taking the average of a portion of education. It must be the other portion that's below average, and that's the portion that is made up for by the local taxpayers and local municipalities. Yeah. I think one thing the funding formula committee did uncover, or did expose a little bit when we were meeting, is that as a state is adding more and more to the funding formula, many municipalities on Island are pulling back and giving less and less. So the students aren't really gaining a lot or as much as they could be gaining if both the municipality and the state were contributing at the same accelerated rate.
And Senator,
that answers your question, but it's kind of a reason.
It does. I think it does in part, and I know that we have legislation this session that's trying to address the local share and the gaps there.
Senator Acosta,
yeah, go ahead.
if I can just jump in on that, I think you're bringing up a good point. If you don't mind, I just want to jump in for a second. I think the local share part that Mark referenced is absolutely a key part of it, and is, again, part of the funding formula recommendation. I think the other part, though, the piece that Mark was talking about, the market basket that we take, right? We're looking at the market basket of goods for core expenses, right? So the funding formula separates two kind of expenses: core expenses, non-core expenses. Core expenses are things that are happening in the classroom, right? Teachers, textbooks, all those sort of core elements. The mapping that we actually use to go to that New England average, we haven't updated since we originally did the formula, right? So teaching has changed in the last decade. Our cost base might not be matched to the right things within the core amount. And so that's another funding formula recommendation. The other one, so that's related to the core. The other side of that, related to non-core, includes things like transportation, healthcare, utility, pension obligations. Those are all 100% expected to be funded by state share. Local share. There is no state share to that. And that's another piece that I think, in all honesty, that, again, to the point of the local share, it's not just the local share of the core that the cities and towns are expected to fund, but it's also all of the non-core cost. And I think that's another piece of it that we have to continue to push the envelope on to see if that's actually a realistic assumption, or if we have to do it. And that's all of those things that I mentioned are all sort of addressed through a series of some of the recommendations. So I think it's a really good point, and I think it underlines the piece that I think we tried to attack, which was the title of the funding formula was the Education Equity and Property Tax Relief Act, and I don't think that we in 11 years now, we haven't seen the equity that we wanted to. So I just want to jump in there because I think it was a good point that you made.
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, I'm glad you brought up this distinction, because I have a question about one of the line items that the state covers part of. And so I'm speaking specifically on the categorical funding for transportation, which this year is set at $7.7 million, $3 million of which is for non-public school transportation. So 40% of the transportation categorical funding is going to shuttle students who go to the most wealthiest schools in our state. And I'm wondering why the administration is choosing to continue to fund this, and whether or not we could use those funds in different ways.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, that's part of the funding formula, which is a state statute. We're just following the state statute when we fund that. Funding of the private school transportation, along with other private school costs, has been in the general laws for many years, and we're following the general laws. I think if they didn't do that, yes, the funds, if they stayed in our budget, would go to a different purpose. But right now, we're just following the law. In fact, it's not even fully funded. It should be funded by probably another $3 million to fully fund the statute.
Correct, Mark. So if I may counter there, this is why I think it might be a question for the governor's either DOA person or a different director. It's that it's actually a reimbursement, and so the governor gets to choose at what level to reimburse private schools, and so they're submitting about $6 million in expenditures on transportation, and we're choosing to give them $3 million back. And so my question is, why are we choosing to give them that amount? Why not less? Why not more, to your point, if we wanted to? Because I do think, given some of the conditions that we're facing now, and given the amount of this categorical funding, that giving 40% to private schools, it's a really hard sell.
Senator Acosta, I appreciate the question, and the governor's budget does fund it at something that's close to the historical level. As Mark points out, it is not fully funded. So in that sense, it's not meeting the full obligation. I can bring back that concern to the governor's office for sure.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you, Senator Acosta. Senator Palmer.
Thank you, Chairman. Joe, you can bring that back, but if you go back and look at history a little bit, and some folks on the line will know that, that was Commissioner Gist a few commissioners ago, and the governor attempted that in the budget 3 times, in the General Assembly 3 times, put it back in. So just a data point of what's transpired over time. So, Commissioner, thank you for the presentation. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about the LEAP piece. But here's the challenge I have, Commissioner. We'll talk about race to the top. We'll talk about no child left behind. We'll talk about every student succeed back. LEAP, pick whatever there is. And I understand education changes. But those 4 things I just mentioned were within the last 10 years. There might be something before that as well that education is looked at over the last decade. Unless those initiatives, and they haven't, because if we go back to No Child Left Behind, Race to the Top, No Child Left Behind, ESSA or whatever, and I know I represent District 12, and we all represent different districts here, but unless we fix Providence, it doesn't make a difference. It does not make a difference unless we fix Providence. So my question to you is, I didn't see, and I realize we're in the pandemic year, so it may be hard, but at the end of the day, there are qualitative measures that are important. Absolutely. Absolutely. Connection to families, all those kinds of things, the qualitative side of education is important. But I didn't hear much about the quantitative side. And I recall looking at the last time I looked at the Providence numbers, from a math perspective, and take out classical, whatever, but even put them in the mix. Math performance or proficiency was 9% or less than 10%. So I'm going to be 9%. ELA was 10 to maybe 15%. It was in the 10 to 20 range.
Yep.
That's a phenomenal hill to climb. Even just doubling those numbers, percentage-wise, is a big deal. But even still, it's like when we talk about CCRI, and they've done a phenomenal job with increasing their graduation rate 2 years by 30-something percent. Well, it's like 27% now. Congratulate that, celebrate that, but a lot of work to go. So what can you provide us back at some point, and if it's not tonight, and if it's not soon, when, the quantitative measures of educational attainment, right? That's the quantitative is good, but at the end of the day, if we're not able to add and subtract or read and write the basics, so when will we see the quantitative measures and metrics updated to show that what we're doing is moving in the right direction? Put the pandemic aside.
Sure.
Well, the hard part is that we can't put the pandemic aside because we didn't have RICAS last year. So RICAS would be the measure that we would use to kind of show. So what we are using is, so we have this new curriculum. We have American Reading Company and ARC, and what we're using is their benchmarks right now to show how much improvement the kids have made. And they have, from the beginning of the year, about in October to where we are now, have doubled their improvements. But this is about improvements, right? Where they are, exactly what you said. We started at a very, very low bar. Like there's no way that we're gonna, it's not like flipping on a switch. So it's really hard because I think nationwide, there's going to be some sort of impact. So we will see what that impact looks like for the entire state once we take the RICAS. That's why the RICAS are so important for all our kids, and I'll explain why. One, the scores that the parents get are very particular to the needs of the kids. Two, it is going to be our new baseline because we have to see what's happened during the pandemic. We can't put it aside. It is what it is. And many of the kids experienced personally loss with COVID in Providence, for example, and in Central Falls and in different places. So I think that by next year, we'll be able to see some numbers, but we can see what the internal numbers look like. We're more than happy to share that. We can see progress, but I agree with you. We have a long way to go. We do have a long way to go, but it's not just the academic. We have almost quadrupled the number of days that teachers get professional development and support. We have also made sure that what was happening at the district is now at the local level, that the supports are in the schools as opposed to sitting in the district office. So there's a lot of tangible things that we can point to, but until we have the RICAS, it's going to be really hard.
Thank you, Commissioner. I think the piece is all those investments are good, but we have to see. I'm looking at it from a math equation perspective. I got all the inputs. What are the outputs? At the end of the day, like I said, I'm focused on my district, but if we don't address the issue with Providence, we're missing the mark given the sheer number of students there. And Mr. Chairman, if I can just vector up, Commissioner, to a similar question associated with that. And we've seen it in Newport, and we had the Commissioner Germain up to speak with us as part of the task force, the funding formula task force, or whatever, and amongst other things. And we looked at, and it's interesting, she talked about the growth in students from start of school until October. Okay, that's number one number. And then you looked at the number of students, new students, from the start of school, and that was 200. It was double the number. And the number of languages that students speak, I suspect it just multiplies itself in Providence and other areas. So I think I know I've asked you this question before, and I'm a big believer and a supporter of the categoricals. Why? Because I can see where it goes in, and we can measure when it comes, what comes out. So based on the L, English language learners, and whatever the new phraseology is, I look back sometimes, I say that respectfully, what the new phraseology is, where has it been measured, or where is it measured that, and I've heard, I think you said 3 years, or somebody said 3 years, maybe Superintendent Germain said, you're an English language learner for 3 years. After that, you graduate from English language learning, and you're in, or there's some amount of time. You're not there forever, I don't believe. So can you help explain?
You can be there forever, depends on your scores. So there's an assessment that they take, it's called the Access exam. It's a language proficiency exam. And unless they reach a certain level, they still continue to be multilingual learners. So it is based on the assessment. And I will tell you that one of the other things that we did during the pandemic is create a blueprint for our multilingual learners. And that was really important for us because they are one of the lowest performing in the entire state. And in most states, and not most, in all states, once the child reaches proficiency, they outperform everyone else. That is not the case in Rhode Island. So this is a population that really needs a lot of attention and focus. And as you know, every year we've been asking for additional funding for this population so that we can continue to support them. So they continue to be with us. Many of our kids are still multilingual learners 12 years in. So I think we really need to look at this group.
Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you so much,
Chairman.
Senator. Senator
Chairman.
Seveny. Senator Chacon?
Senator Seveny wants to go first, that's fine.
Senator Seveny, want to go first?
I'm happy to defer to the chairman if he wishes, or I can go first.
Senator Chacon, you're up.
All right, thank you. Commissioner, good evening and welcome. My question surrounds a bill that the Senate passed a couple of weeks ago, and that was the World Language and Dual Language Immersion Act that requires your department to fund it for approximately $200,000 and designate a person from within your department. Now, although the Senate passed it, I'm being told that yes, maybe a lobbyist or somebody is going to the House and arguing against the $200,000, what the Senate passed. Is that correct?
I don't know about this bill. I do know that we have raised money to give districts planning money to open up dual language programs. I'm not aware of anything else.
Well, I guess my question is this here. Would you support the version that the Senate passed unanimously?
I'd have to get back to you and review it because I'm not aware of any bill that was passed related to the dual language.
As a matter of fact, I believe it was one of your staff that coordinated the committee that studied it during the pandemic. I believe Senator. I believe so. Senator Cano, you were part of it, weren't you?
Senator Cano.
Thank you, Senator Chacon. So we did hear this bill in the Senate Education Committee, and we do have, we did have great support for the multilingual learners, the dual language program, and also the allocation of the $200,000 so RIDE could implement dual language. It was great support, and we didn't even have an opposition for RIDE. So we are hoping that that legislation would be supported. We do have a bunch of organizations that support it, and it's for multilingual learners and to make sure that there is more dual language programs, and the $200,000 would be allocated for it. So that is Senator Chacon's bill. He had been working on it for like the last 3 years since I've been in the Senate. He's been constantly on it. We finally passed it on the Senate. So it would be unfortunate that the $200,000 will be taken out of, the bill on the House if that is what they are loving. Like, I'm not sure if it's right, or I'm not sure who is loving it for that to be taken out.
Yeah. So it's a foreign language. It's a world language bill, not dual language. There's a misnomer around it. So it is a world language bill, and they have been pushing for a position, and obviously we would love a position to be able to do this work. But the dual language is a little different than the world language. I'm sorry, that's why I didn't know which one we were talking about. So it's about, when a kid is learning a second language, that's not a student who's a multilingual learner. So if I were learning French, or if I wanted to learn Italian, it's what we typically know as world languages, or what we used to formally call foreign language. So absolutely, we support that.
Okay.
My apologies.
All right, Commissioner, just so we understand, the bill is Senate Bill 457, and I know you haven't reviewed it, but if you could review it and get back to this committee on your position, so now I can talk to the sponsor on the House side, which I believe is Representative Diaz, to make sure nobody from RIDE is opposing the $200,000.
We will get back to you by tomorrow, I promise.
Thank you.
Senator Seveny.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. So I've got a couple of questions, or maybe one's a comment. Perhaps I'll start with that. Commissioner, ever since you took the job, we've kind of had this ongoing dialogue related to performance and outcomes measured by or compared with budgets, costs, and all that, and we really haven't made too much progress. This dates back to the whole question with what are you doing with all UCOA data, and how do you know what one school is doing with their budget as opposed to another when you compare the performance outcomes of each and they're different. We can't seem to find that string to pull on to figure out what one school might be doing right versus another school doing something different that maybe isn't quite as right. And, certainly the Providence with the Providence stuff, those issues transcend that to some degree. But that leads me to another cost planning sort of a question. And this relates to the charter school expansion stuff and all that, which, as we all know, has been a pretty hot topic around the state, right? One of the first questions we asked when this came up, and it became clear that there was a significant change coming to move kids out of the public school system into the charter school system. How is that going to be paid for? I mean, Providence, I guess, is one of the systems that would be most significantly affected by this expansion, right? Thousands of kids. We saw numbers approaching like $90 or $95 million over the performance period where this expansion was going to take place that would be coming out of the losing systems. And when we asked, what's the cost plan? How is that loss to, for instance, the Providence school system? What's the plan for that? How is that loss being covered? Because as I understand it, the kids that come out of the losing system, that's pretty much a random exercise through some sort of a lottery. So how does a school system plan for those losses and the monetary reductions that go with it? We asked the mayor of Providence, what's the plan? He didn't know. We asked some of the Board of Education folks that we talked to when they came up for advice and consent, and they didn't know. What is the plan?
Sure. So I can speak for Providence. As the charters come in, all charters, they have to put a financial plan for Providence. So as you know, about 19,000 parents apply for charter school out of the 24,000 students that we have. So students apply. We know, and we heard earlier about the single-digit performance. That's going to take time to change. Both schools, I just want to be very clear, they're both public schools, and RIDE oversees both of them. So the plan is that we can consolidate. And what that means is that in many places you get 2 students from here, 2 students from there, 2 students, and it becomes hard to, let's say, fund a class. Senator Pearson and I had a long conversation about this last year, and I took his recommendation and we sat down and we really looked at if they're going to be, let's say, 50 kids from Providence, that we make sure that then there is a plan within a school to how we're going to then move the kids that are coming in so that they can be part of that school. So it's not 3 kids there, 4 kids there, and we don't feel the impact. So we have to prepare financially for that.
I'm not sure. Are you talking about the schools that are getting the kids or the schools that are losing the kids?
Well, the district. So the district, Providence has a district. So for example, a charter school starts in kindergarten, right? So let's say that charter school X starts in kindergarten. We know that we have 1,500 or 3,000 kids that start September in Providence. Of those 3,000, 100 of them are going to go to a charter school. So now we know that that's going to happen. So that means that we have to do enrollment in a way where we are making sure that there are enough kids in a classroom so that we can sustain it, because obviously a certain number of kids generates a teacher. So it's really about strategic planning, and that's what we are prepared. As the numbers have come in, we've done the math. We know how that's going to play out. And I want to be pretty clear that the kids are still going to get what they are going to get, they're getting now, and they're going to get more. What we've done in the last year, just to put everyone's mind at ease, is that in the last year in Providence, I will tell you that we were able to repurpose $1 million that was not being used properly in the district. We repurposed that money and put it back into our system. We also, for the first time in the history of Providence, were able to have a small cushion, because all districts have to have that, because when a boiler breaks, we don't own the buildings, we have to cover that. So we've done a lot of planning financially to be ready so that there isn't an impact. But I oversee both. So I think that puts me in an interesting position, because they both have to succeed. And that's my commitment, and that's my responsibility in this role to both entities.
So, so is there a plan? Is there a plan written down on how this is going to get funded? Because I'm looking at it from the perspective of, you got a system with 25,000 kids, and they're going to lose 5,000 of them over the next 5 years. And they don't know which ones, because it's a lot of them, right?
But we know what grade level. But we know what grade level is going to happen, and it's going to happen in kindergarten. So we know that in kindergarten, we always have to make that provision and assign those schools. So we know that's not something that we don't know.
So you're going to have a reduction in force for teachers, and you're going to close up portions of buildings. Is that how you're funding, or is that how you're filling in the hole that the $90 million is going to leave behind in the Providence school system?
No, I just finished saying that we found $1 million that weren't being used properly. We found inefficiencies in Providence that were currently not being used. And I have to say that I'm thinking about the kids. And those of you that know me now, that's who I put front and center, is the kids. And I want the kids to be able to be successful in both systems. And it's incumbent upon the adults to make that happen. And that I see that as my responsibility. So there is a plan.
Okay, so I guess, so I'm kind of hearing that the plan is centered around you're going to deal with the shortfall that Providence public school system will be facing through efficiencies gained over this.
Yep.
$90 million worth.
But it's not $90 million, that's over time, and the district changed. And what was interesting, if you look at the data, that even though other charter schools have opened up in Providence, the number of kids in Providence has remained stable. The number has not changed. The enrollment numbers have not been impacted by that. We have that data for the last 3 years.
Okay, can you send us this plan?
Oh, sure, absolutely. I can send you the data.
So
well,
yes.
I don't know that I'm smart enough to deal with data. I'd rather have information, data that gets developed into a plan, and this is what we're going to do. This is how we're going to absorb the costs. This is why it's going to be fine for Providence, even though there's a lot of money leaving the system, which, frankly, defies my understanding.
Yeah, but I don't see it as leaving the system. I oversee both. So I can't say that it's leaving the system. It's staying within the system and serving all the kids in Providence.
So, Commissioner, if I can jump in for a minute here, and I think I understand Senator Seveni's point. And, I think one thing that listen, you and I have had a chance to work together since you got here, and I think one of the things that you know about me, I hope, and you speak for yourself, but I care about every kid, whether
that's right.
They are in any school in Providence, in Pawtucket, in Cumberland, in South Kingstown, or anywhere else in the state. And I think one of the talking points that's often out there for folks, it's okay for people to disagree on the best outcome to get there. I don't think that, members of this committee disagree all the time. That's the nature of the legislature, and that's the process. And I think one of the things that is often out there in the sort of pro-charter forces is often that, we're here for kids, not for systems is a common one, or we're here for kids, not for, the adults to, for their own, whatever the adult interests are, et cetera. And I want to just take those pieces apart because I think, if you look at, any level of Senator Cano's work or Senator Murray's work or so many of these senators, Senator 70 who's just talking, it just is one of those things where I think we got to be extra careful around as we talk about this. It's okay if I think we all want the same outcome in the end, and I think there can be reasonable disagreement around the best path to get there. And I think it's just important to keep that level head, especially given the ads that are on talk radio at the moment that would tell a different story, right? And statewide mail campaigns that have mine and Senator Cano's face on them, which I just it's unfortunate. But what I would say, a couple of things on that I just want to, I believe are accurate, and correct me if I'm not, right? I think there were 19,000 applications for charter seats. I think students applied to multiple schools though, right? So it's not 19,000 students, it'd be 19,000 applications because of the duplication of applying to multiple charters.
No, Steve, are you on?
Yes, Commissioner. It was last year. It was about 20,000 applications for about 1,800 seats. I believe it was about 11,000 unique applicants.
Okay. And is that statewide or is that Providence only?
Yes, sir. That is statewide.
Okay. Do we know the average size of a school in Providence? How many students?
They vary. It depends. We have very small schools and we have very large schools.
Throw me a range. Small or big?
I don't know. 1,000?
All right. So the applications that are in front that were reviewed, I think, is for 5,000 students from Providence, roughly phased in over. I forget the year period. I think it's 5-6 years, something like that. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. So I think to Senator 70's point, and I think that, and then you referenced this a bit in the conversation around it, is now I think there's a theory of the case that you could still see student growth, right? The system's 25,000 kids. And if you essentially create 5,000 seats outside the district in a 5 or 6 year period, that's a pretty fast clip from a growth perspective to assume that the district would have no contraction within it, right? So I think we'd have to, I think to Senator 70's point, we can look at that data there, and you got to assume the population trends continue and the density of Providence would have to continue to grow, right, to have, right, 5,000 extra seats. A district that's 25 growing by 5,000 in 5 years would be a significant growth level. So I think you have to assume there's some shifting, right, of overall enrollment numbers from the Providence School District into a charter school, LEA, I'll call it. And I think your point, which is good to hear, which was, hey, we have to be cognizant and strategic about how we deploy those seats, because what you don't want to do, right, is take a bunch of kids from different grades, different schools, and then you can't find any efficiency in the district. But if you have a plan, which is I think what you're saying is like, hey, there's a way to do this strategically where you can figure out how do you manage that enrollment plan to match opportunities against the district that allow you to be in a position where you're not decreasing the available resources to the remaining students that remain in the Providence School District. Because my principal concern this whole time is the 20,000 kids that remain, right? And those kids are just as deserving and just as needful and as anybody else. And I think that's what myself, and I know Senator 70, and I think others are asking for, which is, can anyone show us that plan that says, how are we going to have an enrollment strategy that allows us to create something to take out cost in the Providence district. And if you said to me, hey, if it's 80 or 90 bucks, 90 million bucks we got to get to in 5 years or 6 years, that's the 5 or 6 year mark. And to your point, we think we can find 10 million of it in efficiencies, or 15, or whatever number you want to throw out there, right? And say, we think we can do that because we're going to reallocate some money. And then we're going to find another gap by, the way we're handling this enrollment strategy. We think we could, rethink how we organize these schools. And we talked yesterday about a K through 8 model rather than K through 8. There's ways you can do all that. So we think that can get us down another 30 or 40 million. And then we think, the last part, we're solving for, and that's another 5 or 10 million. But that's all we're asking for, right? Is help us walk us from that top line down to the bottom so we understand and we know that if the current applications that proceed, that it won't harm the 20,000 kids. No one's been able to make that point with facts or information. It's just been sound bites, radio ads, and things like that. And I think that's the case that we're seeking, and I think it's perfectly fine. I think it's perfectly fair to ask for that level of review.
I don't disagree. And you and I had this conversation last year, and I reference it because we talked about having this plan. So there's a couple of things that are pretty, we did find those about $1 million, and there's more money that we found. So for example, Providence was funding schools at the level of where the school is. So for example, a school building was built for 1,500 students, but only have ever had 800 students. They were still putting in the resources for the 1,500 students, meaning staff, meaning all sorts of resources. So we found that. We found that in at least 5 or 6 big schools where that was happening. So that's another pocket of money. We also are having more localized schools, so busing changes too, so that we're not busing kids all over the city when we're really looking to build the community schools. So there's a lot of things that we have already put in place. And the superintendent has already planned for it and has a plan for it, financial plan for it. So we've been working at this. The moment that you and I sat down and we said, okay, how is this going to happen? We put that in motion. The other piece is that I'm personally responsible for what happens in Providence. So we would never neglect. And I want to share because when we started talking, we said, okay, we heard a lot of, well, they won't get art, they won't get science. So I went back to Central Falls, that 40% of the kids in Central Falls are already in charter schools. Central Falls has art, science. The kids that are there are getting the same thing. Obviously, there are challenges there that are different, but they're not being deprived anything else that any kids are getting anywhere else. So I think we have to really look at all those conversations as we really move forward. I think the other challenge that I'm having, I don't know about any ads or any of those things, I do get a lot of phone calls myself, is that we do need to look at what's happening in the school district. Because I have to tell you, when you have kids that can't read, I went to a school, and I'll give you an example, and I was told that the 5th graders, all of them are reading at a 1st grade level, all of them. And I asked the question, there's always going to be 1 or 2 kids that are behind, always. But the entire 5th grade class, multiple classrooms. I'm not okay with saying to that parent, this is all you're going to get. And we're moving. Trust me, we're moving. We have a new curriculum. We're moving the agenda. We're moving the needle. We're doing all the things that we know are right. And one of the things that I would like to do is come back with a Providence presentation so that you see all the things that we are doing in the district to move that agenda. So if you guys, if the committee would allow me to come back and do just a Providence presentation, I'm more than happy to do that so that you can see and hear all the things that are happening. Because we have spent every waking hour ensuring that it gets better. But the reality is, and I want to give you one other example. This year with COVID, we worked with CCRI and RIC to make sure that every 12th grader in Providence had the opportunity to go to college and finish their 12th grade at the same time simultaneously. But what happened? Only 1/4 of our kids even qualified for CCRI with ninth grade math. 12th graders. These are 12th graders. So if we're not going to talk about that when we talk about these different opportunities, then I think we're missing a big piece of the conversation. And I appreciate that we can agree to disagree. Like I said, I oversee both. But for a child that is a 12th grader, and let me be clear, that not everybody in classical also qualified. So we have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of work to do, and we're doing that work, but that's not going to change overnight. That's just not how education happens.
No, I think that's perfectly correct, Commissioner. And I think at the end of the day, the urgency that you're talking about, I firmly believe is important. And I think you know that this committee, I know the Education Committee chaired by Chairwoman Cano, is ready in any way possible to be as supportive as we can to help accelerate the work, fund the work. I firmly believe that there's nothing probably more important that we can take up, not only for those individual children, but for our overall state's workforce and our economy, than education. That's why we've spent so much time in the Senate on it, because we do believe that, and we have worked for that. And I think in your point around those kids, you're right. And I just think the only motivation that we have is the remaining 20,000. And we want to make sure, and I'm not saying that is not a thought for RIDE. I'm not insinuating that at all. I know that is not. I know that
I'm glad you said that.
And I know that you are working very hard to do that. And we just want to make sure that we're doing our job, right? Which is, to advocate for our constituents, right? In this case, I represent Carmel Lincoln, and so we're not talking about them today, but we want to advocate for them. We want to advocate for all Rhode Islanders, and we want to make sure that every kid has that opportunity. And so I take you up on your offer. I think it'd be great, and I know I'm looking at Senator Cano, and she's giving me a yes up and down, so I'm getting her permission, I think, in the moment. I'm sure between the two of us, we would love to have a conversation focused just on Providence. And I would like to ask that if we could please get to the math and the strategy around how are we going to think about Providence from an academic perspective and from a mathematical perspective, and make sure that we can help. And listen, if there's an investment we need to help make to bridge that gap, right? Because there is something that you can't move fast enough, and we need to help you. Then help us make that business case that says, hey, this is what we're doing, and we've got a gap we can't solve. And so to make sure that, we don't we make sure that we can offer what we need to for every student, for these 2 years until we can manage this out, we need $5 million more bucks. Come make that case to us and let us help. But I think that's the approach that would be probably really good and really healthy for us to go through.
I appreciate that, and I appreciate your support as Senator Connor participating. I appreciate all of that, and I feel responsible for all the kids, and that's the work that I do, and I just want to reassure everyone that we are looking at these charters for these places that are really struggling. We're not looking for a charter in Lincoln. We're not looking for a charter in places that don't need them. Charters were made to be an innovation. I don't know what's happened to me getting here, prior to me getting here. I can only speak to what we're doing now. And I want to reassure everyone that we are keeping all of this in mind. And I know, and I appreciate the partnership. I really, truly do. And I hope that you hear that, that I have a responsibility. For many years, Providence has been neglected. This didn't happen overnight. When those 12th graders can't do ninth grade math, that didn't happen 2 years ago. That didn't happen 5 years ago. That's something that's happened for decades that, it's going to take some time to correct. So I appreciate the partnership and anything we can do. And if there is funding for our multilingual learners, I'm going to put that out there as a case, not just for Providence, but for our entire state, because it's really important. And I'm here to support all the districts, all the districts. And that's my commitment, and that's all that I can make to this committee. And we will show you what we're doing, and we will show you how we're going to continue to move forward.
And Commissioner, I'm getting the round robin from all of our members. I think they all have questions for you, but I'm going to throw one Providence question in before we get off that topic. And if you want to defer this to the Providence conversation, happy to do so. So just let me know. Taking a look at the sort of proposed funding formula, Providence would get about 9.8 million in additional state aid year over year. If my memory serves me correct, there's a statute under the takeover that would require the city to match the percent increase, I think is what the statute says. I could be a little bit off there. Could you maybe give me if you have this off the top of your head, is that statute reference my memory at all accurate, and what are we expecting from the city compared to that statutory requirement?
It is accurate that if the state increases its funding, the municipality, in this case Providence, is expected to increase their funding to the school. So yes, that is accurate.
And do we know if the budget, I'm not sure if the mayor's even proposed a budget for the next fiscal year yet. If he has he included that increase in his budget?
I think we have conversations that we have had about where we need to land on that. That's all I can say, and I can have further conversations during our Providence conversation.
Okay.
If that's okay.
Nope. Thank you, Commissioner. I appreciate it. Senator Cano.
Thank you, Chairman. I just don't want to take a lot of the time, but I want to concur with your comments and just make sure the commissioner know that we are super committed to work together. And I think that the comments of the committee members that have alluded to the fiscal plan are very important, just like Chairman Pearson said, just so we can make the case to make sure we could provide some support and understand how we're going to take care of all the students, just like you said. And the students that will not be able to attend a charter school per se, we need to give them the same amount of support. So I appreciate your willingness and your collaboration. We're here to work together, like Chairman Pearson said, and let's just work together on that fiscal plan. I think that it would help us. When we first heard that legislation in committee, we asked for the city of Providence to provide us with some data, and we haven't gotten it. So I think that is really what prompts the committee to continue asking the question, just because there's not understanding of how the fiscal impact would be, how the resources are going to be allocated. So to Chairman Pearson's point and Senator Savini's point, I think that we really here with the same mission in mind, just to serve all students, regardless of what model they use or what approach would be. But every student deserves to have the same, high quality education with the resources necessary for it, and that is why it has been a priority. So I just want to say thank you so much for being honest and transparent, and for explaining to the committee really what you're thinking. Honestly, it has been really hard breaking for some of these members of the committee to really receive attacks for community members saying that we really don't care about Brown and Latino community members or students, that we really don't want to educate them, that we want them to stay ignorant. Those are the things that are out there, and it's pretty sad, because we all want the same thing. And I know it has nothing to do with you, but I want to make sure that you know the level of frustration that provides to some of our members that are really truly caring about having to get the best approach and solution to make sure that all the students in Providence, in Central Falls, Pawtucket, Woonsocket, and all the state get the same opportunities. So I really want to say thank you so much to you and your team, and we're really looking forward to working together to find that solution. So thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah, can I just add one thing? UCOA, I know that I was asked about UCOA. So we're building a data system, because this came up last year, that will track the UCOA along with the lines. Because right now what happens is that all the districts are kind of putting in the UCOA data differently. So we have actually created a system so that we can track it. That's part of our new data system. So we'll be able to have that data. Sorry, I just wanted to answer that, because I know that I was asked, and we moved on to another question without me responding. Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Commissioner. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Commissioner. Senator Paolino.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Commissioner, for being here. So I want to circle back to something you just said a little while ago, talking about proficiency in fifth grade in our inner city schools. Can you tell me the proficiency for fifth graders in charter schools for math and reading, please?
Sure. What I talked about was that I went to a school where the fifth grade teachers actually told me that the kids were reading at first grade level, but I can give you
Very
the
concerning,
proficiency. Steve, can you, I'll give you some of the data that I have here, but Steve, if you can jump in. So I'll give you an example. In the charters in 2019, and correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, 4.2% of the charters, they were at 42% proficiency, and the state average is 38. So they're above the state average and ELA, which is English Language Arts. In math, they're at 36% when the state average is 29%. So they're, and in these districts that we're talking about, I can send you the actual information for the districts that we're talking about, Central Falls, Providence, how the kids are doing in the charter school versus how they're doing in the traditional public schools.
That would be great. It would be nice to get a comparison of those two. If I'm a parent and my student has an opportunity to go to a school where they're going to read at fifth grade reading level, 42% chance, or they have seems like a 0% chance of reading at a fifth grade reading level, I want to give them the best opportunity. So, thank you for being here tonight, and please continue the good work and looking into this stuff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Palmer.
Thank you, Chairman. Commissioner, when you do come back to talk about Providence, and we don't need to discuss it tonight, if you could also discuss at that time what the exit strategy for Providence would be from the state, and also the exit strategy for Central Falls. I've only lived in Rhode Island for 38 years. I'm not certain when the state did what they did with Central Falls. I don't know how many decades ago, but the state's still doing what we're doing with Central Falls to a degree like we're doing with Providence. So not tonight, when you come back, if you can talk about the exit strategy for Providence and the exit strategy for Central Falls.
So I will do that when I come back, but I will say that in Central Falls, the only thing that we are currently doing is funding them. So
that's what I mean. But at the end of the day, the state's running the school. It's funding all the schools. The buildings, 100% of the buildings, and 100% of the education.
In Central Falls, that is the case because the city can't maintain the finances, but that's not a decision that we made at RIDE. We actually don't currently run the district. We just pay the bills, basically.
Okay, so we don't run it, but we pay the bills. So if you could talk about that when you come back, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure.
And
Sure.
Commissioner, actually on
Thank
that,
you, Terry.
thanks so much. Commissioner, actually on that topic, and I honestly can't remember. The Board of Trustees for Central Falls Schools, how is that appointed? I honestly can't remember.
The Board of Commissioners for the state.
Good answer if you know. Senator Cano might know the anser.
So I think the
Board of Commissioners for the state
Sorry.
actually approves
Go
the
ahead.
members of the Central Falls School Board.
So the Board of Ed?
Board of Ed, yes.
Okay.
Yep.
So Commissioner, I think this is just to give you more context, I think, or Senator Palmer's question. I think one of the things that's talked about often within the State House anyway is for Central Falls, we created, every other district in the state, I guess absent Providence, I think, has a generally elected school committee from their community, et cetera. When Central Falls was sort of funded, it was also driven by a board of trustees that I believe is at least confirmed by the State Board of Ed. So there's some there's some piece there, and I think the question just is that that's been going on. Again, I'm not sure the exact fact, but I think since the mid-90s or something like that. I can't quite remember. Where do we go from here, right? I think that's kind of the question on Central Falls. Is like, we made this decision mid-90s. We have this kind of quasi-state board. The state funds it. I think you mentioned earlier you had 40%. I've got 50-something% at charter, but we've done a lot in Central Falls, and I think everyone's saying, okay, where are we going? And even related to that, I mean, even this year in the budget request, we've got an extra, 1.4 million and 1.5 million in new stabilization funds for Central Falls. And so it just constantly comes up, from members all across around, hey, what's going on in Central Falls? So certainly would be something else good for us to spend a little time talking about.
Sure. And we will bring a plan to you because for the first time, we are going to be involved. We have not been as RIDE, and we intend to be involved in Central Falls.
Okay. Thanks so much, Commissioner. Senator Acosta, speaking of Central Falls.
Yeah, I'd love to address some of what's been said so far. I do want to start by saying that I don't agree on principle one of the remarks the commissioner made about who does and doesn't need charter schools. I represent Central Falls and Pawtucket, which are part of the Blackstone Valley. And if you look at the adjacent communities, we weren't made by mistake. We were made very intentional. And so Cumberland, which is right next door to Central Falls, in 2018 had a student population of almost 5,000 students, only 133 of which were Black. So few that in many grades you couldn't even report the number of Black students in those grades. That is not a coincidence. What we have in our state is hyper-segregated public schools and in some cases, hyper-segregated charter schools. It is not realistic to educate our students in these types of environments and then expect them to go out to the real world and be compassionate, empathetic, understanding, learned beings. And so the reasons why so many of the people, even on this committee, struggle to understand some of the dynamics at play are because we come from hyper-segregated environments. Central Falls was created in 1894 because Lincoln, as a town, did not want to have to pay for a fire department in that community, which is where all the workers live. And so they took a vote during a time at which land was a requirement for suffrage. That is not a coincidence that they were kicked out and created to be their own community. And so we didn't choose to be here. We were forced to live in the types of spaces and attend the types of schools that we go to. When we talk about what is the plan for Central Falls cannot afford its own school. And when in the 90s, this conversation started, none of the adjoining school districts wanted to take those kids in. Because the reality is in America, we hate poor people, whether they be Black, brown, or white. And we definitely don't want them in our community. And so when we talk about what our schools could and should look like, what they shouldn't look like is the way they do now. A lot of white schools in our state, and a lot of Black and brown schools in our state, and a lot of Black and brown schools that happen to be poor as well. And so that needs to be said and acknowledged by the people on this committee. The ability to access a high-quality public school is not universally distributed for the residents of our state, and especially for the residents of my community. Now, to talk simple math, one of the things that I'm not understanding about how we're framing the kids out, money out conversation is that we're also not accounting for the savings on not having to educate some of those kids. So it's bizarre to me that we keep talking about 5,000 kids leaving without acknowledging that that's also 5,000 kids that you no longer have to spend money to educate within that space. So where the money would have been encumbered because of particular types of contractual arrangements and fixed costs is something that we should be discussing. But it's not just that a district loses money. It's also that it no longer has the responsibility for educating large groups of kids. And the reality is that one kid might be marginal, right? But when you have bigger groups of kids, that's also cost savings, which nobody's acknowledging in this map. Now, finally, and related to this point about accountability and performance in charter schools, I do have a question for the commission about what circumstances are in play when a charter district or a charter school doesn't meet the academic accountability standards that have been set out for it. So different from most schools, charter schools have to apply every 5 years. And there are certain standards that they're supposed to meet. Now, I understand that academic achievement and standardized tests can be contentious, but the reality is that's one of the standards. but have been cases in which schools have not met those standards and yet have been allowed to continue to operate. And so I do have a question. When is that the case? Why is that happening? And is that okay, given what we describe to be the purpose of charter schools in our state?
So, I'm not okay with that. I don't know what's happened prior to my arrival. I've been here now 2 years. Last year, when we had charter approvals, was the first time in the history of Rhode Island that we closed down a charter school. Because I truly believe that if they're not meeting, I believe in high standards for everyone. I do believe that. So they were not performing up to par, so we closed down the school. That is the first time, and we're holding everybody up to the same bar. And I do have to thank you for speaking up, because we do have very segregated schools and we do have a challenge in our state. And I think that we do have to really look at those things a little differently while we have these conversations, because I don't think we are having the right conversations.
And as a quick follow-up to that, you have more say over Providence now. Pawtucket, one of the communities that I represent, Verrier and Winters elementary schools look very different, quite literally. But they also have very different performances as a result. That's true in Providence. So within districts, have we considered changing or moving away from the kind of homeschool community school model to redistribute what you could consider some of the need? Teaching 25 kids who are low income and all English language learners is a very different dynamic than teaching 10 or 15 and 10 or 15 who are not, right? And right now, part of the problem is this concentration of need in particular places and this reluctance to redistribute. Is that something that we're thinking about in Providence or in other parts of the state? I know that's what regionalization was trying to do 10, 15 years ago, but has been unevenly successful at.
Yeah, so we're looking at Providence very differently, and we are also starting dual language programs that have been very successful. One of our highest performing schools is a dual language program that really has a good mix of kids and that are almost all multilingual learners, but have been able to move forward. So we are looking at diversifying, looking at the community, but we're also really looking at strengthening what happens in the schools. I think there's a big deficit model, and the expectations are not the same, and we need to change that. And that's a hard thing to do, but I'm in agreement with you. There's a lot of work that we need to do, and we have to have the conversation about who the kids are and what we need to do to support the kids. So that's why I look forward to working with this committee and really looking at who's being shortchanged here.
Thank you so much, Senator. Thank you, Commissioner. Senator Felag.
Thank you very much, Chairman and Commissioner. Thank you for your leadership in education. One of the things that really has struck me is that this is the first year of the funding formula that we don't have what we considered in the inception 10, 11 years ago were winners and losers. And the way we did the educational formula from what it was previously was to say that those districts that were losing money would lose it over a 10-year period, and those districts that were gaining or more rebalancing their educational aid would receive it over 7 years. And so since that period is up, this would be the first year that we don't have that. And I would have thought that we would have saw some consistency in terms of the funding formula. But what I do is I see more inequities than I see consistency in the funding formula. And by that I mean, why are communities, or the richer so-called communities like Barrington and East Greenwich, getting over 30% more in educational aid this year than they did in all the previous years combined? In other words, Barrington is getting $2 million more when they were previously getting 5.8, and East Greenwich is getting $1 million more when they were getting 3.3 million. So both of them are over 30% increase, whereas my district that suffered a $8 million loss over 10 years, 800,000 per year. Now all of a sudden we thought we were going to be homogenized out, and I see that we're losing 1.2 million this year out of our 12 million. And we're a regional school district. So I guess the question becomes is how are we doing this shared ratio? And then why isn't it causing such inequities or big fluctuations in a year that should be all homogenized and shouldn't see these drastic changes? Or are we going to have to plan for this roller coaster type thing year by year based on when a community does property revaluations or medium income checks, or is it because those communities didn't do a good job of accounting for their free or reduced lunch students?
Mark, can you help respond to that?
Yes. Hello, Senator. So, you're correct. The 10-year smoothing out period of losing communities, if you will, is over. But there's still many variables within the formula that will cause a community to lose money or to gain money. I know you mentioned a couple of communities that gained some funding this year, and it could be a result of increased enrollment. It could be a result, as you pointed out, there's not all the communities will reevaluate their property at the same time. And although there's some factors that go on at the Department of Revenue to try and even it out, it doesn't even out until you actually do the actual, I believe anyway, the actual evaluation. So everybody's kind of sharing out of the same pot. So if there's an evaluation or revaluation that causes home prices values to increase, then the communities proceed to have more ability to pay for their education expenses, and therefore the state ratio for them would go down, and they'd be expected to pay more. And that might just change the exact following year when all the evaluations catch up, which has happened in several communities over the last 4 or 5 years. So it's an uneven. It could be uneven, and I think the solution, which I also came up, I believe, in the Senate Task Force with funding formula, was to have a cap on how much a community can increase or decrease and smooth it out over a period of years. So I think there is a recommendation that could be helpful for that. But I think there'll always be fluctuations because the communities have different things impacting them at different times.
And Senator, if I can, and thanks, Mark, and I agree there. I think one of the things, Senator Felag, that I think, to Mark's point, that we did look at. So I think there's sort of two questions embedded there, right? One is the state share ratio in of itself, and is that the right share ratio formula? Because I think there's some moving averages in that can make a community's number go wildly up and down. And so I think that the first question is just that state share even right? And so I think we want to apply some pressure test to that, and that's one of the recommendations. And then the second piece there is that in the meantime, we did have a recommendation that the amount that any district could lose in any one year was capped. And really the intention there was, and sometimes, and I felt it in Cumberland, I know Senator Archambault had it in Smithfield, communities that have just a change in one of the measures of the formula can see a pretty dramatic dip in their funding. And the dip in the funding actually basically either meets or exceeds the maximum levy that they can raise under the 4% cap. So you definitely want to make sure that we're getting more stability in there. That was one of the other goals anyway, the formula.
Yeah, but in all deference, Chairman, it's a little too late for my community. Why should my community suffer this type of thing? And if I was a steward of my municipality, I would tell my municipality, don't do a reevaluation. Keep your property values low. Why should communities do a reevaluation if they're going to find out that they're going to be penalized because of the cost share ratios are going to fluctuate to make them so much more affluent, so to speak, and it's going to change the funding formula.
Yeah.
I mean, and I still don't understand how Barrington and East Greenwich increased by 30%.
Yeah.
You're never going to convince me of that particular fact.
Yeah, no, I think, Senator, your point's well taken, and I think that the share that the state pays, I think, is something that was in the recommendations that we take a look at, and not only what the percent target is, but like how we get there, right? What values are you using, right? As you try to get those numbers, right? What property values? It's right now, I think it's like a 5-year rolling average, and then there's some income values and how all that's calculated, and so that definitely is part of the recommendation to kind of open up that Pandora's box, which, by the way, which is not only funding the funding formula, that's also what the distressed communities aid's based on. It's what the construction aid's based on. So there's a follow-on effect to that formula, if that makes sense.
And I guess my next question is regarding the reduced and free lunch programs. How are communities in terms of accounting for that? Because that definitely has an impact on the amount of state aid a community will make or receive. Also, why isn't there any discussions more towards regional bonuses? It's something that we talk about districts regionalizing, but we don't provide any incentives after the fact for those communities to remain regionalized. And I guess if nobody wants to comment, let me ask the next question then. Why are the regional school districts losing a lot of money in transportation aid this year?
I can respond to that. It's a reimbursement, so it's based upon the amount of transportation that was provided the prior year, and the transportation costs were less last year, mostly because of the pandemic. And so what we have done, frankly, is we have told the regionals that this is what the actual number is, but we did not decrease the actual categorical aid. I think it's about $400,000 more than the bills were, and suggested to the governor and the House folks that they leave the aid alone and they can and give us a plan to redistribute it so that everybody can stay whole. So because we don't know what's going to happen to the funds, we told the districts to expect a lower number so they wouldn't be caught short when the budget actually passed. So there is a possibility, if the budget passes as is, that they'll be able to restore some of those funds to the regional school districts with their transportation, because the loss was due to the pandemic.
Exactly, and that's my point. Thank you, Mr.
So there is a chance they could recoup those funds.
Thank you so much, Senator. Are there any other questions, or Senator Paolino?
Thank you, Chairman. This question is for the Commissioner. Just trying to understand how successful our ELL program is in Rhode Island. Can you give me an idea or tell me how long it takes for a student to become proficient on average through the ELL program? I'm also curious to know what percentage become proficient and actually graduate. And then if you can finally provide, how we compare to some other states around us when it comes to graduation and proficiency, I would appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure. So our program is currently not great statewide, and I'm speaking statewide. Our students test out higher than they do in other states from our assessment. So that's something that we have talked to the assessment company, whether our cut scores are too low, because they test out higher in most states. When the average kids that test out after 3 to 4 years is about 15%. And then those kids usually on the RICAS, what the equivalent of the RICAS in other states, they outperform. They do better than everyone else, and they graduate as the valedictorians. That is not what we're seeing in Rhode Island. So in Rhode Island, our kids are testing out faster, and then they are plummeting in our English language arts tests, our math tests, in graduation, SAT, PSAT. They're very, very low. So we really need to change what we're doing. And that's the work that we have. So I will send you the blueprint so you have a copy of what we have put in place as our new way to operate. But I know that this is an area that we have asked for funding for many years as a state so that we can keep moving our agenda forward for these students. So we compared to other states, we have a very low performance rate for these students. And I can give you the exact numbers. I can send you those numbers with a packet that we'll put together.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's critical to our students' success. We want to make sure we're giving everybody an equal shot, and I think this is a great way to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Absolutely. Thank
Commissioner.
you.
Are there any other questions or comments from members of the committee? Okay. Hearing none. Commissioner, I want to thank you and the entire team at RIDE for being with us here this evening. Also want to thank you for the engaging dialogue and willingness to continue. And I'll work with Senator Cano and you and your team, and we can certainly come up with a time to come back and delve a little more deeply in Providence and Central Falls there. And I'm looking forward to it, and I really appreciate these conversations that we're able to have.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for the thoughtful questions. And we hope to meet all your expectations. We're working really hard to make sure that Rhode Island is in a different place. And, my goal is to be better than Massachusetts.
We share the goal.
So we'll continue to do better. And if there are things that we can improve, we'll continue to improve. So thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Commissioner. We do have two individuals signed up this evening to provide public testimony. The first is going to be Paige Clausius-Parks, representing Rhode Island Kids Count, speaking on the budget for the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education in support. Paige, welcome to Senate Finance.
Hello, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony today. I'm Paige Clausius-Parks, Senior Policy Analyst at Rhode Island Kids Count. Rhode Island Kids Count would like to voice its strong support for several elements of the proposed budget for the Department of Ed. I know it's a late night, and I have submitted written testimony, so I'll just share some brief highlights of the areas that we are in strong support. First, beginning with the fully funding year 11 of the education funding formula, we're really pleased to see that. And we also want to take a moment to thank this committee for all your hard work to establish and to continue to study the effectiveness of the education funding formula and its impact on equity. So thank you for that hard work. For multilingual learners, you've heard me testify in the past around the academic outcomes for our multilingual learners. The commissioner just shared some of those data points, so I do not need to repeat that. But we are strongly support the proposed investment of $5 million for the Multilingual Learner Categorical Fund, and we also acknowledge that even more funding and resources are needed to support the needs of our multilingual learners. In terms of the elements for resources to teach mental and behavioral health skills, in the U.S. and in Rhode Island, the impact of COVID-19 has increased the mental health needs of students. My written testimony includes several data points around the prevalence of mental health conditions, trauma, depression, and suicidality, and stress among our Rhode Island students and youth. So I just hope you take a moment to look at those data points because they're really important. Adverse childhood experiences, toxic stress, and trauma can be experienced by any child at any point in their life. And if schools are not equipped to meet their mental health and emotional needs of students, our schools can actually perpetuate or introduce new traumas. So we support the governor's proposed investment of $590,000 to provide teacher training, curricula, and resources to teach mental and behavioral skills. And we also urge the General Assembly to provide the funding needed to increase the number of mental health professionals in schools. For college and career readiness, we urge you to continue to fund the dual and concurrent enrollment initiatives at levels that make these opportunities engaging and rigorous for all students, especially for low-income students and students of color who attend schools in the urban core cities, because many of these students can benefit greatly from access to advanced coursework that helps prepare them for success in college and in careers. For support for low-performing schools, also you'll see my written testimony includes data and a chart regarding school performance classifications in the 2018-19 school year. You'll see from that chart there's 5-star ratings for each school. Schools that have a 1-star rating are the low-performing schools, and they're low-performing in multiple indicators. 7% of the schools in Rhode Island are identified as in need of comprehensive support and improvement. 17 out of those 22 schools are located in the 4 core cities of Central Falls, Pawtucket, Providence, and Woonsocket. And that is why we support the governor's proposal to create a new position at RIDE to support these schools that need really comprehensive support from RIDE. Child Opportunity Zones, we also are in support of funding for these schools because we know community schools are a powerful equity strategy. I know we've heard hearings and bills in the past couple of weeks around community schools, and we are in strong support of them as an equity strategy. And lastly, for state pre-K, I will conclude and want to emphasize our support for the investment in our state's pre-K program, which is tied with 5 states as the highest quality program in the nation. However, it's ranked 32nd in access for our students. So our pre-K system is a mixed delivery program that is delivered in child care centers, Head Start programs, and public schools. And this sets us up really well for the part of the recently proposed federal American Families Program that calls for a universal preschool for 3 and 4-year-olds. And we need to continue to close coordination between RIDE and DHS so that can all move forward well. So that will conclude my testimony. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Paige. Are there any questions or comments from members of the committee? Hearing none. Paige, thank you so much for your testimony. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next to testify is going to be Linda Katz from the Economic Progress Institute and the Workforce Alliance, speaking also on the Rhode Island Department of Education's budget, taking no position. Linda, welcome to Senate Finance.
Thank you, Chairman Pearson. First, I just want to compliment all of you on the hearing tonight. It was really, I wish that talk radio could play parts of your discussion with the commissioner. So I just want to thank you for your dedication and hard work. I'm actually going to talk about adult education, not about K-12. And sadly, I think I need to start off by saying that the adult education system is serving many of the adults who sadly were failed by the K-12 system. And for 10 years or more, the Alliance, the Workforce Alliance, which I helped to facilitate, is talking about how we need to shut off the tap, which is 6 K-12, but drain the bathtub, which are the thousands of Rhode Islanders, adult Rhode Islanders, who turn to the adult education system to gain foundational skills. Senator Seveny mentioned the commission that Senator Metz convened a couple of years ago, which was really the first time that there was a lot of attention paid to what was going on with the adult education system. And it is it's an important part of our workforce development system in providing access to foundational skills of English language learning, literacy, math, and more, and with growing importance, digital literacy skills. And there are currently 20 organizations. I think that's what Senator Seveny was referring to when he talked about the third-party providers. There's 20 organizations around the state that serve thousands of adults each year. Before COVID, the annual enrollment ranged from 6,000 to 8,000 at those different sites. And even during the pandemic, the network was able to serve 5,000 adult learners. They pivoted very quickly to remote learning. And many of the parents of K-12 students were among the adults that were served by these programs. The programs also operate year-round. When the commissioner was talking about whether the adult education unit or division at RIDE needed to have increased resources, she referred to the fact that, school is almost over. But this is a different being, and while it sits at RIDE, there really needs to be much more attention focused on, by the RIDE administration, on this important part of both the education and the workforce development system. There are about 68,500 working-age adults who lack a high school credential, and 31,000 who do not speak English well or at all. And this is the target population that the adult education system is is working to provide. And I would certainly say that in terms of a racial and ethnic equity issue, during the pandemic, we know that many of the people who lost their jobs or were impacted by the pandemic were many Latinx and Black Rhode Islanders. And these are the folks that we need to provide skills to, not only for their own economic mobility, but because by providing these foundational skills to adults, they are more employable. The foundational skills are what the employers are looking for when they're hiring people. And this has been demonstrated year in and year out with surveys of employers. What are you looking for? We have to make sure that all adults have access to English language learning. That's the waiting list that Senator Seveny was referring to, and that RIDE invests both the monetary resources, but importantly the administrative resources to ensure that this network of providing these critical services to adults is the best that it can be. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda. Senator De Palma.
Thank you, Chairman. Linda, thank you for testifying. As always, Linda, one of the comment on the adult learners and the GED, I think one of the things we heard several years ago with Senator Metz was the issue on the GED and adult learners was the cost for the GED and what the state would pay for or not pay for those who couldn't pay for it. And it almost became the case where if we couldn't, it was almost we were being penny wise and pound foolish. If we weren't going to provide the means or the cost, the funding for allowing folks to take the GED, it was people were going to get to the end and not be able to achieve the credentials they were looking for. So any comment on that? Has that gotten better, Linda?
Well, it's interesting, Senator De Palma. You all did pass funding for vouchers for people to be able to pay for the GED. I haven't heard any complaints that the vouchers are not sufficient for the people who need to use them to be able to take the test. But that's just another good issue of why there needs to be sufficient administrative staffing at RIDE for the adult education part of their program.
No, it's good. It's good to hear then that something we do is right once in a while with regards to providing the funding for the GED. So thank you, Linda. Thank you, Chairman.
And I'll just mention, just spinning off that, Senator, that there are students in some students who, when they reach age 16, are not benefiting from sitting in the classroom, are allowed to have an alternative learning program. And they're still enrolled in the school, but they can do, many of them just go on to get their GED instead of going to the classroom. And again, the Adult Education Network is the place that they go for these alternative learning plans. So it's integrally related to the K-12 system, and we're fearing that, especially now that there's been so much learning from home, that some of the students will not want to go back to the classroom, but will want to continue to get their GED, and we need to make sure that the adult education system is adequately staffed. Those community providers are staffed to be able to provide services so that kids can get an alternative high school diploma instead of sitting in the classroom. So there's just so much importance to this network of providers that is not getting sufficient attention, especially at this moment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Senator Murray first, then we'll go to Senator Seveny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Linda, for your testimony. Senator De Palma's question segues into mine. Well, it's a question and also a statement. So, Linda, you stated that the adult education program is year-round.
Right.
Okay, so I guess that means that there's more of an urgency to fill that third FTE position than was previously indicated. Unfortunately, RIDE is no longer on the call because that would have been a great follow-up question, but thank you so much for your testimony.
Yes, and I'd just like to say my understanding is that it's one full-time person and they're hiring a half-time person, not even another full-time person for the second position. So that may be, be great to check into that. And 3 would certainly be the right number, the right complement of people to make sure that the program's operating appropriately and complying with federal rules. They get federal funding through the WIOA program. There's all sorts of documentation and data that entity needs to provide.
I agree, Linda, and thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Murray.
Thank you. Senator Seveny.
Thanks, Linda. I just want to thank you for speaking up. This has been certainly a big issue with me ever since I served with Senator Metz on that commission. And one of the outcomes from all that, after all the testimony, was that perhaps it would be a better idea to move the adult education mission to some different department within the state. And at the time, Department of Labor and Training was quite interested in taking on that role. So maybe there's an opportunity to pick that back up where we left off.
Yeah, I think Senator Seveny, the issue is, and you heard me testify about this to the commission, we really need to figure out as a state how the adult education function should be staffed and funded, and then where it sits is sort of a secondary question. But it's it's the what of it first, and then the where.
Agreed. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, and thanks for your leadership on this.
Thank you, Senator Seveny. Are there any other questions or comments from members of the committee for Linda? Hearing none, Linda, thank you so much for your testimony this evening. We appreciate it.
Okay, and thank you all very much.
Thank you. That does conclude our testimony this evening from the public and does conclude our agenda for the evening. Oh, we do. I'm sorry. We have a
Motion to
bill.
adjourn?
I'm sorry. I think I'm skipping my own bill, to be honest with you.
Motion to table?
I'd like to bring before
All in
the
favor?
committee Senate Bill 828 by myself, an act relating to education foundation level school support. I'll just read what it says. Extends the time period the schools have to commence construction to correct health and safety deficiencies in order to qualify for increased school housing aid. This is something that was brought to me and requested by several districts, essentially around some of the deadlines we had put on the original school construction projects. Required them to have them approved and then commence by certain dates. Because of COVID, we had a series, obviously, a lot of communities felt like they fell behind, and so we wanted to bring this forward to consider and debate whether we should extend those timelines at all to give communities the opportunity to sort of catch up. We did not actually have any testimony signed up on this tonight. Are there any questions or comments from members of the committee? Hearing none. Senator Palino makes a motion to hold, second by Senator Murray. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Chairman Pearson.
Yes.
Senator DePalma.
Yes.
Senator Felag.
Yes.
Senator Paolino.
Yes.
Senator Acosta.
Yes.
Senator Kano.
Yes.
Senator Chacon.
Yes.
Senator Murray.
Yes.
Senator Seveny.
Yes.
Senator Sosnowski.
Yes.
10 in favor, 0 opposed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clerk. Now that does conclude our business for the evening. Senator Murray makes a motion to adjourn, second by Senator Paolino. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.